We've come to Camberwell in South London to talk to the artist and writer Andrea Mason. Mason, who is currently undertaking a creative writing PhD at Goldsmiths, began her career as a visual artist in collaboration with her partner Philippe Bradshaw, whom she met in 1986. He was studying fine art at Goldsmiths, and she was studying German and Russian at King's College London. Mason's collaborative and solo works have been exhibited throughout the UK. She's contributed to conferences and publications and recently founded the creative writing enterprise Literary Kitchen, awarded the UCL Advances Bright Ideas Award in 2011. Literary Kitchen has grown out of Mason's own practice, providing courses, events and mentoring to develop new writing. In 2014, Mason organised the inaugural Literary Kitchen Festival in Peckham, which is now an annual event. Andrea, can you talk to us about your practice? A minute ago you were telling me that you stand up to write at this desk here. Why is that?
It's to do with the back and functionality and health issues. So as a writer, obviously it's such a sedentary practice, but also it's an activating process, isn't it? If you're standing up, it just activates everything, how you think, how you respond, because writing actually is, the activity of writing does do things in the brain. So even that, handwriting, there's that idea of free writing, which is it's the thing of moving the hand on the page continuously will bring things out of you. I'm going to say of your subconscious. I always think sounds a bit, but yeah. So I think it's good to be reminded of the active process of writing. So I really enjoy having made my standing desk. It's quite a new thing. Okay, so I really need to see things. I need to see what's here out in the world. I need to visualise it. So I really love painting blackboard walls, and it's that thing of as a writer, everything's going on in here, and I feel that writers should have studios, just as artists do, and we should get the process out into the world whilst it's going on. And for me, that helps me as a writer, helps me create the piece and architect the piece, because that's what you're doing essentially when you're making a piece of fiction or creative writing. It is a structure and an architectural process, so that's how I approach it. So I really like being able to see it on the wall, or I do this kind of thing, lots of notes stuck up. But I particularly like to do it with the blackboard wall. So this was me actually trying to work out a plotted narrative arc to my novel, which has been a long process writing the novel. And the second version that I wrote, I went to the Robert McKee's story seminars that he does in London, and then I was so this is your basic narrative arc, beginning, middle, end, up to the climax. So I was plotting out all the plot events, and then working out exactly how did they fit, what do they mean. Robert McKee, he is sort of a screenwriting guru, and he does this. He's got a book called Story, and he does seminars, like 3 a year in New York, LA, and London, and it's a week-long seminar. Actually, he was the character in Adaptation, the movie Adaptation, and the Charlie Kaufman character finally is persuaded to go and sit in on these. He's very cynical about the whole thing of process and story and narrative, and he's forced to go and sit in on these seminars. And he's very bossy, this guy, Robert McKee, which I quite enjoyed. It was quite nice, because I do so much teaching now, it was really nice just to sit and be told things. I really enjoyed that. But he's very good about the idea of, if a scene doesn't have any kind of change, like we start with the character in one state of mind, and if we haven't ended up at the end of the chapter or at the end of the book with any kind of change, then it's a non-event, and you have to drop that scene or drop that whole chapter, or maybe ditch the whole book, because it just isn't doing anything active on the page. There's no journey.
Can you give us a tour around your shelves at the moment, and tell us a little bit about why you've got these books and which ones you refer to often for your work, for your practice.
Okay, so these are recently built shelves. I'm very delighted with them. I've got 2 rows of kind of art, specifically this row is art books. So this area, some of which is we're going to look through in a minute, is kind of the archive of my art practice with Philippe, so the Andrew and Philippe archive and some of his. This is catalogues that I've collected along the way, lots of them of artist friends and a few other extra things. This is some actually left over from the festival booklets. Then we move into writing, and I specifically made the writing shelving at my head height, so I've got my standing desk, and so it was important to me that when I looked to the right, because it used to be the archive was here, which is obviously in the past, and I wanted to move beyond that and my previous practice and sort of strengthen what I'm doing now. So I've made a little shrine here. So I'm sort of finally finishing the novel. That's been a very long process, and then the next work that I want to make is a short story collection. I've done some, and I want to do some Shunga stories, and I was very influenced by...
What are Shunga stories?
Shunga is, there was an exhibition a year or so ago at the British Museum, and it's Japanese erotica from centuries ago. So Hokusai was a big proponent of that. So the fisherman's wife image of the woman and the octopus. And I absolutely love animation and graphic novels, and I'd read these stories, and then I saw this version that Penguin had done where they'd had an artist make the cover, and I just love those images. So they're kind of influencing the next body of stories that I'm going to be writing. And I've got some idea of wanting to be in the Thames, in the river, and sort of in the mud almost. I'm going to learn kayaking, in fact, in April, so that I can kayak down the Thames and then just kind of feel like I'm sinking in the mud and in the river and see what comes from that. And then I've got here Gertrude Stein. I love this book because when I first came out as a writer, so having been an artist for many years, and then I kind of never told anyone I also wrote or wanted to write. When I finally admitted, there was a friend called Guy, and he said, "Oh, you need this book." So I took it away thinking, fantastic, this will be, the clues to everything I need to know. So I look inside, and of course it's Gertrude Stein, isn't it? But so, I mean, it's just brilliant. I love her so much. And in a way, I looked at this a little bit then, and then didn't come back to her. And I've sort of come back to Gertrude Stein again now. So she's going to be part of my PhD, the critical aspect, because it's very much about the sound, the words on the page, materiality of the text. So I've definitely come full circle again with that.
If it's about sound and the words on the page, then does performance and performing the work also come into your practice?
Yeah, I think performance, process and performance for me are 2 key elements of writing, and I really try and advocate those through Literary Kitchen. I always get my students to read their work, and then we do readings and readings events.
So this is how contemporary practice is bridged with contemporary writing? Contemporary art practice, you could say, or you could argue that contemporary writing may be contemporary art practice.
I think it's becoming a really big field at the moment. So there was a time when art writing was becoming kind of more prevalent and interesting, but it was very, very niche. But now what I'm seeing is obviously, the mainstream publishers are becoming like these corporate monsters, and they don't allow for experimental practice. So the art world does, and you get lots and lots of independent presses and practices through the art world, which allows different types of writing, and very much the performative element really counts. You get things like performance as publishing as performance. All this kind of activity happens in the art world. And so I've got some colleagues at the moment who I met at UEA, Creative Writing MA, And they did their first novels each through the normal literary channels, and they're now writing their second novel together, which I find fascinating because collaboration in literary fiction is really unusual.
Who are these people?
So they are Natasha Subramanian and Luke Williams, and they performed at the festival last year, and they performed the book together. So
At the Peckham Literary Festival?
Yeah, so it's entirely performative. And they're publishing it in each chapter. They're going to publish in different publications. And they recently did a series of talks and events called Plastic Words at the Raven Row Gallery. So there is a big movement now of merging with the sort of that kind of underground fringe of writing, moving into the art space, and a sort of bit of this going on. And even in academia, it's being recognised to the extent, I think even at Goldsmiths they're considering now they did have the art writing MFA and that's folded, but I think they're thinking now of maybe can there be a strand in the PhD which really recognises this crossover of art and writing and art practice, writing being an art practice, because I think that's where I'm at with it.
I understand that you did a BA in German and Russian in the 80s, and then you met Philippe Bradshaw in 1986, and you started a collaborative practice with him a little later on. Can you talk to us a bit about that and perhaps show us some of the work that you did with Bradshaw?
We were very much as a couple, doing everything together all the time, and so it literally came out of our sort of the way we were in life. So I think all this stuff began because I was the kind of person I would be fascinated by maps, and I would love things like, say, Isle of Sheppey or Canby Island. Just like they sound weird and random, let's just go there. And so we did lots of journeys and nighttime journeys. These pillboxes just kept coming up, and there was something he remembered from his childhood. And then in terms of working out, well, what are we doing with them as art? I don't know, I think it's quite organic. We did this body of work involving wartime pillboxes. So it's those funny concrete structures in the middle of fields that were abandoned, and he, for his degree show, worked a lot with glass, and so it was a kind of combined moment of deciding that we would glaze the little windows. So this was the first one that we did in Leicestershire. I think we did about 6 altogether. But then what we did to sort of then frame it as art practice was we put an advert into one of the very early frieze. So this was our first official artwork as Andrea and Philippe, essentially, and we put our telephone number in there. And we did get some phone calls, including an American gallery, which is quite fun. And we did a year later, we did another advert. This is in Flash Art Summer '94, and we'd been out to this one, and because it was the anniversary of the first one, we sort of put up all these flags, made it like a sort of shrine. But most of the act was that we glazed the pillbox. Out of this grew, well, lots of ephemera and ephemera moments. We ended up making all these kind of souvenir items. So we had little fridge magnets. We painted the badges on walking sticks and made these special walking sticks. These are other fridge magnets. And then we made these little vending machine packages, and we had a vending machine. We went through various galleries, including the ICA bar. And then we were invited to be in a group show called Cooperators in Southampton. And so that was the catalogue picture. But for that we actually made this quite crazy big red kiosk item, and so that was what we took to the gallery. This was all making all the stuff for the pillboxes. So I'm for the vending machine packages. So I actually handmade the little cardboard boxes, made all the labels, photocopying. So this is all stuff that I did. It's all the kind of nitpickety stuff, really. So making all the little tiny, had these lighters, souvenir lighters made up, and some the boxes all had different things in. So this would have been a long package. That would have been the label on the top, lighter inside. A lot of the boring stuff, you know, the organising, the writing letters and framing and curating and shaping. He did the actual physical putting the windows in. And we also glazed one of the, there was a really big pillbox on the coast along from Southampton, and so we glazed that window as well. What I need to add is that most of our work got either vandalised or destroyed along the way. So, for instance, well, that very first pillbox that we did, when we went back one time to have a look, the windows had been very carefully removed and propped up inside. The pillbox window that we did for the Southampton show, on the night of the private view, the curator called us and said it had been smashed. The vending machine at the ICA got vandalised. Then I think it's a territorial issue, isn't it? So we are, for instance, I don't know, who does that pillbox belong to? Does it belong to a farmer, and maybe that person had come along and not like the fact that someone had just turned up and done an intervention on what was essentially perhaps their property, and so they removed it. And then in Southampton, I don't know, I guess it's just a nice target, isn't it? Suddenly there's a really lovely big piece of glass. I mean, it was big toughened glass that we used, so I don't know how that got smashed. But with the vending machine, I think it was a Tampax vending machine, which we got from Rent-A-Kill. And I guess again, it's this thing of something being out of context. It's in a bar. Normally, if you're going to use a vending machine, it might cost £1, and it's costing £4. So maybe it's an issue around value. And so they would get these lovely little packages, which, you know, £4 for a bit of art, you know, can't be bad. But because you're dealing at those levels and you're not framing it, and you're not saying, it's not in a gallery space per se, and you're not framing it as, you know, art that needs to be looked after and taken care of and that you mustn't touch. So we're just putting it out there in the world. One thing I definitely want to point out is, as artists, both Philippe and I, and me very much since, we resolutely refused to make objects, really. So we didn't make sculpture or painting or anything easily saleable or frameable or anything that needed to be stored. If we did make some objects, well, if they weren't kind of destroyed by someone else, we would then not destroy it, but for instance, we made the big red kiosk, and then what we did was we had it crushed at a car crushers, and so it became another sculpture, and then we took that, there was a show in Holland, and that became the piece for Holland. And we also did a 24-hour exhibition using cardboard, and we recreated these 3 galleries, and at the end of the show we took it all off and recycled it. And then we made a fake estate agent called Landfill. And so what you could buy was that we would go, you choose, we did about 100 different sheets, and you would choose the one that you liked, like choosing a property. And what you were buying was for us to go and glaze it for you. Here's a few of the actual estate agent sheets. We had about 100 of these, but most of them got burnt in the fire. So I think what's interesting about this is actually where we did make use of narrative, actually, because we made these little story bits up when we were doing the description. In the top of a field behind the Gulf garage, this large brick rendered pillbox sits under the shelter of an oak tree, opposite a second pillbox. It looks out towards Carew village with a disused airfield directly in view, now in use as a caravan park. Proposal to glaze in clear glass. Dimensions of all the windows. Price on application. So it's all a bit to do with fantasy, you know. One of my favourite books as a child was Alice in Wonderland, and I just loved that whole thing of going through the mirror, and just this surreality of it, really. So even though it kind of has a very formal aspect to it, I always saw it as like, well, the idea of like the pillbox and being inside the pillbox is like this vantage, this it's like an armature, isn't it? It's like, you know, you're away from all all the annoying aspects of life, really. So it's very hermetic. And then that was a show that we did at a place called the Independent Art Space. And again, you see, we do this thing of we never framed anything. So anybody picking that up would have no idea, really, that was a...
What was the reasoning behind that?
I don't know. I think it was just, we always had this idea of it had to be real. Or maybe, I don't know. I'm only kind of thinking about that a bit now in retrospect, because I realise I still do it with things that I've made subsequently, because I tend to end up making lots of publications. And I was asked with this one, with the South London Gallery, to put a little sort of contextualising essay, and I really didn't like having to do that. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I think there's something about, does it feel like it dilutes what the work is if you're having to go, oh, but it's just art. So I think we quite like the idea of people just wandering along and going, oh, it's an estate agent, what's that? And then being kind of turned around when they realise what it is that's on offer. So I realise now what we were doing is a process called détournement, which the Situationist did, but I've only come to that knowledge much later on. I didn't know when we were doing it, that's what we were doing. We made a caravan, and so it was like a travelling estate agents, and we had all our ephemera inside, and the walking sticks, and all the sheets and sheets of properties. And then we took it to Documenta X. We kind of crashed Documenta X. It was quite fun. We were there for about 5 days, I think. And then it was in another show in Norwich. And so it was parked up outside, obviously, but it was part of the show. And then the caravan got burnt down outside Norwich Gallery the night after.
Do you know how that happened?
It would have been because, we had all our lighters in there. So I guess someone just found a whole bunch of lighters, and I guess they were just messing around, and lo and behold, it got burnt down. It felt like that was the end of something for our joint practice. I was 97. We did carry on working together for a couple more years, and we started working with this anodised chain. It's the chain that you see in butchers' shops, that kind of silver chain that you have between the kitchen and the shop front to sort of stop flies. So it's exactly that, but you can get it in all these, like 14 colours. But it was used in a sort of tapestry way, so every individual link was individually put. And this became Philippe's main practice, working with this chain, making all these recreations of artworks, essentially. We made the first big Fragonard piece together, but to me that always felt like that was his work. And then we did a final show at the showroom where we were invited in '98 to have a show at the showroom gallery, which of course was like brilliant. But at this point I'd kind of decided that I thought we should stop working together. So we were a little bit, what do we do? Do we tell Kirsty we're not working together and risk losing the show, or do we just do a final show together? So we did do the final show, and it was kind of a bit of a launching of Philippe, really. We called it Andrea and Philippe Presents Philippe Bradshaw. And it was quite a change in the type of work made. But it was still about creating environments. That was always present for both of us in our work, like with the pillbox thing, the kiosk, that was a little mini environment, the caravan. So there was lots. So it was, there were still all these kind of commonalities in the work. So then this is the final show that we did together at the showroom. This is actually a Fragonard. It's the girl on the swing. But that bit of curtain went across the doorway, so when people were coming in from the front space, they had to come through the curtain. And then there were projections, so this whole room was painted black, and then we had a projection going on here, and there was a stage built here. And basically we took over the whole space, including the back garden. And Philippe kind of took up residence, really, in the gallery for the month of the show. But this then was the end of our practice. This was the final show we did together in 1999. I think it was my decision. Yeah, and also I did have this urge to write. I wanted to be a writer.